Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today to learn about food waste. I'm Monica Williams with USDA's Agricultural Research Service, and we'll be here for about 30 minutes to talk about food waste and also answer your questions. And today we'll be talking with food waste expert, Dr. Tara McHugh, who is a food technologist and director at ARS's Western Regional Research Center, which is in Albany, California. And they have a lot of research that they're doing out there, but one of the areas of research is on food waste and what to do to reduce it. And you might already be familiar with or even know Dr. McHugh and her innovative research on turning food waste into healthy delights like edible film wraps or the technology behind the world's first all fruit bars packed with 100% fruit. So if you have questions that you would like to ask Dr. McHugh, go ahead and put them into the comment section and we will address them as we go along in today's broadcast. So to kick things off, Dr. McHugh, could you tell us what is the difference between food loss and food waste?
Of course. Thank you, Monica. Thanks for that introduction as well. So the difference between food loss and food waste is that food loss is produced earlier in the food chain. So food loss would include food that is lost on the farms during manufacturing, during production. And then food waste is material that's lost in the home. And that's the area where consumers can have the most impact on reducing food waste.
Okay, so food loss is basically associated with the production of food, and then the food waste would be the food that we as consumers bring home, and if we don't use it, discard it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Perfect.
So would you say that one is worse than the other?
They both contribute to the challenges around food loss and waste, and that's why a lot of the times you hear about both in conjunction with one another. The biggest distinction that I see is that consumers, the area where they and listeners today can have the most impact is likely around the food waste area more than the food loss. In ARS, we do contribute to finding solutions for both.
Okay, so here is a question for you. Approximately how much food gets wasted by consumers?
So by consumers, overall food loss and waste is estimated to result in over $400 billion in economic loss annually in the United States. And so it's a very, very big problem, and something that we all want to work towards solving, because at this other hand, we also know that 1 in 6 Americans are food insecure. So that's another good reason to find better uses for these food materials and get them to people who need them.
Yeah, I would imagine, restaurants and schools, I would think that food waste would be a problem for them too.
Correct. Restaurants and schools also face challenges around food waste, as well as, consumers at home. And so by working together, we can find solutions to improve food waste and loss in the country during the years ahead. There is a multi-government organizational initiative to reduce food loss and waste by 50% in the next 10 years by 2030. And so there are a lot of efforts going on in all those areas to provide solutions to restaurants, schools, consumers to help fight this challenge.
Wonderful. Okay, here's our next question. What are some of the most common foods that are wasted?
So probably the category of most commonly wasted foods is fruits and vegetables. They're very perishable. Another perishable food category is dairy as well. And so that's one of the top 3 categories of food that's wasted. And then the third is actually cereals, and bread is one of the food groups that's most wasted, interestingly enough.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, our next question is, rather than throw unused food in the trash, is there a way to put it's a good use?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before in those categories, a lot of the food that's wasted is wasted because it's so perishable. So finding ways to better preserve produce is one way of reducing waste. So using your freezer is one option. Reducing the temperature in your refrigerator will extend the shelf life of those perishable items a bit. Also understanding labeling, when labels say use by versus best by, and what those indicators mean, as well as what we call source reduction. So learning to buy less when we go grocery shopping or go to a restaurant, and reduce waste through source reduction in that manner is important as well.
Okay, yeah, I would think that, if you're not going to use the food, try to put it in the freezer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And a lot of times that's for myself, just developing a habit of doing that. So if I have leftovers from a restaurant that I know I'm not going to eat the next day, maybe just put it in the freezer and then I'll eat it a few days later for lunch and bring it into work. It's a good option that works for me.
Okay. All right, our next question is, I've heard that a lot of farm produce, both plant and animal and dairy, goes unharvested each year. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you have figures, could you provide that too?
Yeah, there's that is very true, and a good area to help address this challenge as well is food that's lost on the farm. It's about 20 billion pounds of food lost on the farm annually in the United States. So that's obviously a lot of material, and some of the large sources are think of wine grape pumice that's left over after you make wine. Another is olive pumice, the material that's left over after you make olive oil. Various juice pumices that are left over after we make juices commercially. And all those materials are very edible, contain nutritious components. So some of the work that we do in ARS looks towards finding new uses for those materials to get them into healthy food ingredients, foods, and whatnot.
Okay, so if you guys are just joining us, just tuning in, we are talking with Dr. Tara McHugh, who's a food technologist and the director at ARS's Western Regional Research Center out in Albany, California. And we're taking your questions. So if you have any, go ahead and put them into the chat section. All right, so our next question is there an environmental impact from wasted foods?
There's actually quite a large environmental impact. A lot of water goes into growing produce. So one of the waste is in water. About 80% of the water is in produce. And so when we don't utilize that produce, we're essentially wasting that water input. In addition, it's estimated that about 4% of the greenhouse emissions from the US are generated from food waste alone. So there are opportunities to help in that regard as well by better utilizing food waste and reducing those emissions.
Yeah, I would think that there's an environment or an economic impact as well for consumers as well as farmers.
Correct. So it's not only environmental impacts, there's also tremendous economic impacts. About, as I said before, $400 billion in economic revenue is wasted annually in the U.S. through food loss and waste. So it's a good opportunity to generate income, generate jobs, improve the environment, as well as help address food insecurity through better utilization of foods that are currently lost or wasted.
Okay. All right, we have another question. Are there any programs that get you unused food to people who need it? I've heard of farm gleaning or food banks.
Correct. So both of those are very good programs. In farm gleaning, they better utilize all the materials that are grown on the farm. And then food banks help distribute materials to those in needs as well. There's a lot of room for improvement there, though. So while those programs are good and very helpful, they need to be expanded in order to fully utilize the massive amounts of food materials that we've talked about this morning in terms of food loss and waste. But those are good models to follow.
Okay, so could you talk a little bit about what you and your team are doing to improve the technology that may, say, extend the shelf life of produce or improve the quality of frozen foods?
Sure, and I love talking about our research, so thank you for this opportunity to share. In ARS, we do a good deal of research looking at all aspects of food loss and waste and ways to improve them and reduce food loss and waste. So the first that you mentioned is extending shelf life. You know, we talked about a lot of these materials are perishable. So anything we can do to extend what we call their shelf life or reduce their perishability is very important. Some of the areas that we work on are development of coatings that can be applied to produce that actually extend their shelf life and give consumers more time to consume those products so that they stay in good quality and safety in your refrigerator for longer periods of time and you have more time to consume them. So that's one important area. We also work on food packaging solutions in ARS and ways to extend shelf life that way as well. In addition, we look at stabilization technologies like freezing. Our center actually is known as a National Chemical Historic Landmark by the American Chemical Society for its research on frozen foods in the 40s and the 50s. And we continue to do work on new freezing technologies now that can be helpful in extending shelf life and preserving foods such that it can reduce food loss and waste. And then another big area of emphasis that we work on is utilization of those food materials that aren't currently utilized that we talked about before. Pumices, for example, or purees that can be formed into value-added products. You mentioned a few at the introduction. This is a 100% fruit bar that can be made from purees, essentially fruits or vegetables that are, and then I have some films here as well, or wraps. Also that are made out of fruits and vegetables, purees that could be fruits and vegetables that are a little misshapen or too small for the fresh market. So they might not be as readily acceptable in the fresh market and can be easily incorporated into these types of value-added products.
Yeah, you are doing a lot of awesome work out there, and really, I can see it benefiting consumers as well as the environment, and it's great.
Thank you. Thanks. We really love it. Another example that I'd like to share, if we have just another minute, is we completed a project on mushroom stalks. So mushroom, there's the stalk that's left over after you harvest them, and typically that's not utilized. And what we were able to do is develop a new technology to add vitamins naturally to the mushroom stalks and then dry them and form powders. And now you can buy mushroom supplements for vitamin D, which is very important in the diet. As you know, vitamin D's deficiency is very high in the United States, and it's very important for a lot of health conditions. So there's an example of where you can add value to a waste material, mushroom stalks, and also enhance nutrition through development of a new food product, vitamin D mushroom powder.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right, if you are just tuning in, we're talking with Dr. Tara McHugh, who's a food technologist and the director at ARS's Western Regional Research Center, which is in Albany, California. And we're taking your questions, so go ahead and put them in the comments and we'll address them as we go along. Okay, our next question is, how can the average person reduce food waste?
So we've talked about some ideas around that already. One is, portion control in restaurants, reducing source reduction. So when you do go to the grocery store buying appropriate quantities. Some research indicates that buying these home kits, meal kits, can help reduce waste also, because in those cases, you're obviously getting just the right amounts of every ingredient for your meals. So that's a newer way of addressing it. Also getting more familiar with your freezer and using it to extend the shelf life of food products, and also reducing your refrigerator temperature, and looking at the labels very clearly as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's hard sometimes when you go into the stores and you see these, buy two for $5 or, little deals like that. So I would think that, like you say, to buy only what you need, but if you happen to buy more, stick it in the freezer.
Exactly. That's very good advice, Monica. And something that I myself find challenging sometimes, so I can understand how it happens to us as consumers. But it is an important consideration in reducing food waste.
So earlier you talked about fruits and vegetables that may look a little bit different. I think I've heard of them as ugly fruit and vegetables. And, they might look a little different, or they're shaped a little different from your average fruit or vegetable, but I would think that they would still taste the same.
Yes, they do. They taste the same and their nutritional values the same. But we as consumers in the United States, we've gotten very used to very good looking, you might say, or well shaped and formed fruits and vegetables. And now there's an effort to reorient ourselves and open ourselves up to those misshapen fruits and vegetables as equally good food sources.
Okay, so we have time to take a few more questions, just a couple. Our next one is, I'm thinking about starting a compost to reduce food waste. What is the easiest way to get started?
Yeah, so composting is fairly easy. A lot of municipal waste providers will give you a little bin to put in your home, to put food waste into, to gather it before you take it out into your yard. And basically all you need is a location outside. Some people use bins, some people just put the waste in a pile, and you can combine it with lawn waste as well, and allow it to compost.
Okay, but what about moldy food? Can that be composted?
It can be composted as well. What I've heard is that it's best to insert it into the center of the pile if that's possible in your composting. That'll expedite its composting.
Okay, so this will be our last question. We're running out of time. Should I throw food out when it reaches the expiration date? I've seen used by and best before dates on foods, but it can be confusing. What is the difference?
Yeah, it is confusing, and you're not the only one who's confused. There is a national effort going on to both educate and improve upon our messaging in food labels. So Best By is not at all an indicator of any food safety concern. It simply means that the food's best by that date. In other words, the flavor may be a bit diminished after that date, or the texture, but there's no food safety concern associated with consuming it after that date. Used by, on the other hand, you'd want to actually use the food by that date, or preserve it in a different manner, like through freezing early on.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm sure that helped a lot of us.
I hope so. Thank you, Monica.
Yeah. So this concludes our broadcast today. Thank you, Dr. McHugh, for talking with us today about how we can reduce our food waste, how we can get started on making our own food compost, and also sharing the cool products that you and your team are doing out there at the Western Regional Research Center on turning food waste into healthy products. And thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. We have tips on our website and also resources on food waste. So make sure you visit at www.ars.usda.gov And any questions that we weren't able to get to today, we will make sure that they're posted there as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very, very much.